what would you say is the single greatest cost, or if you think there's a few different ones that all rank the same, what are the greatest cost or the greatest cost of lockdown?
The greatest cost of lockdown, and I think, is going to be the damage it does to the private sector. Everyone employed in the public sector has been fine. They haven't had to go to work. They can stay at home, watch Netflix, do whatever they do. But the private sector has been really hit hard. Furlough doesn't help. Entire sectors and companies have been wiped out. And furlough helps to some extent in terms of keeping the wolf from the door from those who are on it, but it doesn't help the private sector in its medium and long-term interests. It doesn't help keep businesses alive as such. And I think what we're going to find is that the private sector is going to be much, much more badly damaged than anyone can imagine once government stimulus is removed. And the first evidence of that is going to be in people who are unemployed. We're not seeing big numbers in unemployment yet, which I'm finding quite surprising.
Yeah, lots of my friends actually have lost jobs and things, but
the numbers don't show it. And I don't understand that. But the fact is, sorry, go on.
It's quite an interesting one that you talk about, the unemployment figures, because actually in the northeast of England, for the first time in something like 20 years, I might be wrong on that fact. I haven't got that prepared, but the unemployment figures in the northeast of England has actually dropped in some areas, which I'm not sure how that has happened. I know there's been sort of a conscious effort, I would say, in getting investment from, we've got British Volt up in Blythe, and some big companies. I know Nissan have been looking at expanding in the northeast, despite Ramona's saying that they were going to leave if we left the European Union. And also we've got the Novavax factory down in Teesside. So I'm not sure if there's going to be a boom in manufacturing again, possibly even carbon capture coal mining, which has been hinted at, environmentally friendly rather coal mining. But it is interesting about the unemployment figures, and I do see a need for a lot more employment programs. What would you say to maybe apprenticeships being pushed by this government in support for firms to employ young people on maybe apprenticeships or traineeship schemes?
Yeah, well, I think they should be pulling every lever. I mean, one of the levers I would pull, one of the ideas I had was a reverse furlough scheme, where you actually pay companies. Once you remove the furlough scheme, you actually go on paying companies to employ people, but they have to work, and you force people to work, as it were, and force companies to restart their activities, even if at the beginning there's not much demand for their product, just so that you get the economic machine beginning to move forward again. And I think Rishi Sunak did a bit of that, but it's too early. You can only do something like that once you wholeheartedly start unlocking the economy. Yeah. And as you said, Alice, the mood music isn't good in that regard. Unemployment figures, to be recognized as unemployed, you have to be seeking employment. And it could be that a lot of the people that have been let go are not seeking employment, so they don't show up in the unemployment figures. I think there are still 2 million people on furlough, and you've got to query whether if 2 million people are still on furlough now, whether they're employable at all by the time we get to, unlocking the economy. And what's the unemployment figure at the moment? About 3 million. So you could see that go to 5-6 million. And then probably it's worse than that because some people are no longer looking for employment. They've just given up on it. So I think all of that's really damaging.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that there does need to be. I think that the reverse furlough scheme, which you suggested, I think that's sort of been done in some ways by Chancellor Sunak with the Kickstarter scheme for young people.
Young people.
Yeah, so I do think that there are, but there needs to be a wide scale program put in place to restart the economy and to make sure companies do survive through this and the private sector's restarted again afterwards.
It's really important. You know, the risk, I think, is that you emerge from this debacle, if you like, economic debacle, with a government too afraid to face up to the economic scarring, and you end up in a kind of state-controlled economy, and the private sector is never allowed to recover. That's the real risk. And I think that's why the mood music isn't great, because I think probably they're sitting in number 10 Downing Street thinking, oh my God, what's it going to look like when we start unlocking? You know, how bad is the damage?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, when we had a socialist Labour government after the war, who nationalised a lot of the industries again.
Exactly.
We never got out of that until 1979 when Mrs. Thatcher was elected Prime Minister. So that's quite a wait, if you like. So I can see why the government might be a bit hesitant in putting all of these sort of, if you like, interventionist measures in place, because it could send the wrong impression out. And I think with a lot of younger people, I think they do expect a lot more state intervention, which isn't a good way forward, as we all know.
I mean,
and I think
some of it is now, I think, unavoidable. You know, if you look at what's happening to our national railway network, I think they're going to have to nationalise it, because how can anyone run empty trains?
No,
they're probably going to have. What?
I said it's untenable at the moment.
It's untenable. Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, it is also an opportunity to revamp the whole system before privatizing it. But, you know, we've got to be really careful about how much state aid is used and how interventionist we are prepared to become, and how much goes back into government ownership. Government doesn't have a great track record in running businesses, you know, and we need it in the private sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite interesting what you say about the trains. It's something which I'm particularly interested in, is the infrastructure we've got in this country. Obviously the privatisation of the railways in the early 1990s, the train journeys, you know, from British Rail to now has went up, you know, immeasurably. But I do think that there's massive reforms needed on the railways. And that's partially to do, I believe, with a quasi-privatised railway system where some of it's still government-owned in terms of the actual tracking infrastructure. But I do believe that the levelling up and the reopening of some of the beach and cut lines could improve, with the levelling up, which you mentioned before, about the mobility of labour, for example. What are your views on HS2? Do you think that should be going ahead? A lot of government spending there in a big infrastructure project. What's your thoughts on that?
I personally wouldn't have done it. And I think the need for HS2 is even more diminished now than it was before lockdown. Before, you know, what we've realized is, and I think we're going to have some long-term impact, is that people don't need to travel as much in order to do their work. You know, we've just had this meeting on Zoom. You know, none of us have had to go on a train. A year ago, we would have met up and we may have done this in a studio or something. But, you know, now we're just doing it on Zoom. And so I think the need for that travel, particularly the need to travel to London, is diminished. And I would have preferred them to start the HS2 program up in the north and do all the lines that they put into phase 2 and 3, to do those first.
Yeah.
And then to think, you know, do they really need to speed up the connection to London?